everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the technique of the month, and pretty excited to do the technique of the month this time because it's going to end up being pretty timely with the trophy sitting right there. Something we just got just a little over a week ago as of filming this, and for y'all to to be seeing it. So had a great time up there at the Potomac River. It was a pretty fun week. Caught a lot of bass. I was adding it up. I think throughout my 4 days of competition, I was over 200 pounds. Throughout those days, I think it was in that 230 range or something for that particular event. So obviously one of my most fish catching tournaments in quite a while, and I ended up working out with the win. It's pretty cool the way it all came together and the plan God had for it all. But certainly glad to do that and get a win up there and fish in a way that I love to fish. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's technique of the month video. Obviously up there late June on the Potomac River, we had a major heat wave, and it got hotter up there than it really should have been for that time of the year. The water temperature got a lot hotter than it should have been, but creek fishing is something that works really well in the summertime when you start getting a lot of hot weather. Not all fish go out deep. Some of them obviously do, but some of those fish do go seek refuge in those places where they know that there's some cooler water that's still shallow. I think a portion of those fish stay shallow all year round anyways, but if you can find places where the water's a little cooler, it congregates them and pulls more bait fish in, and then the fish will come in there to certainly feed on them as well. So creek fishing is something that I typically start doing in July. August it works really well, and then it'll linger into September, especially if it stays warm. But that July, August, September is the time of year, in my opinion, when creek fishing can be really, really good. So just to go over a little bit of what makes a creek better than another, and kind of what worked up there at the Potomac River. Creeks that had actual water flowing in the backs of them. I'm not just talking about a ditch or a cove on a lake, or just a finger going off the lake. This is actually a place where you truly have water coming in the back. Now it doesn't have to be a big waterfall, a big rushing amount of water. Kind of the more the better, but it doesn't take a lot. As long as there is a little bit of trickle of cooler water coming in, there can be a few fish back there. I do feel like the more water you've got, the bigger flow you've got, oftentimes the bigger population of fish you're going to have. But even some of those places, if you're going back in there with the mindset of hopefully I catch 2 or maybe I catch 3, and then you've got a run of those places, a milk run of those places that you can hit throughout the day, you can certainly add up to a pretty good day. And that was definitely the deal at the Potomac. There were a number of creeks that had water flowing in the back of them. There were a number of creeks that I felt like I could get bit in. I ended up not fishing very many. I ended up just staying in that one creek pretty much for the bulk of the tournament, catching the vast majority of my fish all out of one. And I do think that it kind of kept reloading due to that hot weather that we were having. I felt like more fish were pulling into there every single day. So that just gives you a little bit of background on what you're looking for. One of the biggest tools, in my opinion, for finding those type of places is Google Earth. That's something I can go look at the historical imagery. Times when you had big rain, a lot of water was flowing in, or times when it was not much rain and a lot of places were dry, but some creeks still had a little bit of water coming into it. Those are the kind of things that I'm going to look for on Google Earth to try to find which creek is better than another, on any given body of water. And it doesn't matter if it's Del Hollow Lake, if it's Douglas Lake, if it's the Potomac River. Finding places where you do have some fresh water flowing in, again, is really what is key to making this work. So, all right, so you're out there on the lake, you found a creek, you found one that's got some running water in it, and cover is going to vary, obviously, based on what part of the country you're in and the type of system that you're on. Potomac River, again, there was a lot of pads. There was some wood as I got further back into that creek, creating shade, being overhanging, that kind of stuff. But some places it may be grass, it may be eelgrass, it may be matted hydrilla. I think like a Guntersville, you're going to fish a lot of grass even back in creeks like that. Most all of them do have, at some point, you're going to deal with some type of overhanging wood and just creating shade. And another big thing that I think to not be intimidated by, oftentimes in these places in the summer, you're going to be fishing pretty clear water and obviously very shallow water. And that you know, that just really helps determine the type of baits that you're going to fish if that is the situation. So a lot of these, again, you're going to be fishing clear water. But yeah, getting back in there, seeing what type of cover that you've got going on. And I've got 3 baits laid out here that are kind of staples for me. There's certainly others, you know, that are staples for me in the summertime, but really these 3, I've got a moving bait, and then I've got a weightless bait, and then I've got a, you know, a flipping style bait. But top water, something that, you know, a surface bait, and then you've got a weightless bait, and then you've got something that you can actually fish into the cover. That's kind of where my mind's at. I want something to cover those 3 categories when I'm fishing in a creek. So we're going to start with the fun. We'll start with top water. I picked a frog for this video, a buzzbait. It was really a tough pick because a buzzbait is probably a little bit more my favorite. But a frog works really, really well too. And the great thing about a frog is that you can use it literally anywhere. If that creek has grass in it, if it has pads, if it has just overhanging trees, or if it is open water, you can catch fish on a hollow-bodied frog. This is one of the old Terminator Walking Frog Juniors. They actually don't make these anymore, but yeah, a small walking frog, a small popping frog, something that is, you know, not a real big profile, is honestly something that I like in a natural type color. Something that is, you know, maybe even a little bit translucent, kind of like what this one is, but just a natural color and a walking frog, something I can throw on top of a mat, and something that I can fish, you know, really subtle out in open water as well, and skipping it under overhanging trees. That's a great thing about a frog. It's just the places that you're able to put that bait. And that truly is a quality of each of these 3. All 3 of these are pretty doggone weedless, and that is really what generates a lot of your bites when you're fishing back in a creek like this. Like I mentioned, a lot of times it's going to be clear water, but those fish that are tucked in that cover in clear water are a way, way more catchable fish than a fish that's just out away from everything, kind of in open water, maybe in the middle of the creek on a sandbar or gravel bar or whatever. You can catch some of those, but the fish that are tucked up in cover, that you actually have to put your bait in cover to get it in front of that fish, that is a way, way, way more likely fish to catch. So being able to have a bait that is weedless, that I can put wherever I want it, is going to help me catch more fish in a creek this time of the year. So yeah, so frog be one. And then one that was a big player for me, both these next 2 actually, at the Potomac. But the next one up is a jig. This one is a 3/8 VMC utility jig. It's what the old Terminator Pros jig used to be. But I trimmed this one down kind of the way that I was fishing that little jig up there on the Potomac, where I don't have any skirt on the bottom half of it. I've got all that trimmed off. And then I've got the rest of the skirt trimmed down real small, you know, just to make that a small, finessey type profile. I don't want a real big, bulky jig most of the time when I'm fishing in these kind of places, because again, the water's probably pretty clear. And a lot of the crawfish that I feel like you'll see back in those creeks and things are pretty small. You know, I mean, honestly, a crawfish that's that big, that's a pretty good sized crawdad. Like a lot of the crawfish that those creek fish are eating, in my opinion, are 1.5 to 2 inch long. So trying to make your jig compact, trying to make it small, will imitate those crawfish really well. But again, a point that I got to really hit hard is about putting that in cover. Something I was doing up there at the Potomac, there'd be this little overhanging tree, you know, and it's got some branches in it, and I'd kind of pitch at the end of it, but I could see up shallower that there was another place where there was really good shade, and something that was going on in that creek a lot, it does in a lot of them, they'll have undercut banks, places where maybe a beaver or groundhog or catfish has wallered out a hole that actually goes up underneath the bank. Those fish will sit in those places, and they're places that you honestly can't always even see. You don't truly realize that they're there. You think the water is this deep, but then you pitch your bait up there and it sinks, you know, more like that deep. I caught a lot of fish out of those type of places on that jig, where I would put it up in that cover all the way against the bank, let it sink. And a big thing that I do with that jig in these type of places is that I really soak it. Now, out in the front of this, where I was catching those fish around pads and things, I didn't have to. But when I got truly up in the creek in that wood, I would kind of let that jig soak. And I did that for a number of reasons. One, I make a presentation in there. a fish may be out here on the edge of the cover, and you hop it a time or two, and that fish kind of becomes aware of it, and then it would slide in. And then if your jig is in there in the shade, hid real good, you hop it again, that fish would bite. But oftentimes those fish are just moving around in those holes. You know, you could kind of see it at times. Those fish they would, you know, swim up, they'd swim down, they'd swim up, they'd swim down. If you pitch your bait in there, let it sink, it goes down one time, pull it out, move it over, that fish may have just swam through there right where your bait would have been, but you didn't give it an opportunity to be there. So when you're in that key piece of cover in a creek like that, really letting your bait soak is really, really important. And I'm not just saying just pitch it in there and forget about it. I'm saying pitch it in there and fish it really slow. You know, hop it a bunch of times in the same place, that type of stuff. So that's something that I do personally with a jig in that particular situation. Last but certainly not least is a wacky worm. Man, a wacky worm is for me a staple almost any time of the year, almost any color water, if the fish are shallow. You know, like, I mean, I even think of when Andy and I won our team series event at Wisconsin last year in September, caught a bunch of fish on a wacky worm. This tournament at the Potomac River in June, caught a bunch of fish on a wacky worm. Lake Fork a few years ago in April or March, caught a lot of fish on a wacky worm. Like, wacky worm is a really, really hard bait to beat, almost regardless of the time of the year. So, but yeah, wacky worm for me in this particular situation, some of it was sight fishing. On that final day, I think I probably caught somewhere around 10 fish. Some of them on the jig, but I probably caught 10 or so that I actually legitimately sight fished. You know, would see that fish sitting there, make a cast to it, drop my bait down to it, and then able to catch that fish. A couple of them I caught really, really close to the boat. If you were watching any of that, you saw, you know, a couple of them that I caught just right off the side of the boat on that wacky worm, and could watch them, you know, watch them swim up and eat it and all those things. But the big thing with that wacky worm, especially on a fish that you can visually see, and there was a little bit of current there, just enough to kind of make that bait float along. Here's the big thing with a fish like that. If that fish, say that fish is 18 inches or 2 foot deep, okay? You know, it's down near the bottom in 2 feet of water. You can see it. And the water's moving real slow. It's going to sound simple, I think, but once you actually visualize it and put it all together, it's going to make a lot more sense. So that fish is sitting there 2 feet deep, okay? And the water, you know, it's facing into the current. The water's moving past it. If you drop that bait 60 inches in front of that fish, and that fish is 2 feet deep, that wacky sticko doesn't sink like a rock. Like, it sinks, but it's not a super fast sinking bait. So if I place it literally 6 inches in front of that fish, but it's got to get 2 feet deep, that fish is way less likely to see that bait hit the water and immediately come up and meet it to eat it. That bait needs to get down to the level of that fish before it gets to it. So a big thing that I would do there is I would pitch that bait 3-4 feet. If it was that wacky worm, I would pitch it 3 or 4 feet upstream of that bass to where I knew my bait would have time to get all the way to the bottom before it got to the fish. That was a really big key with sight fishing those fish in that creek. So anytime you see one like that, don't think, oh, I'm just going to drop it right in front of its nose and then it's going to get down to it. You got to give enough of a leeway, enough room for that bait to actually float to that fish. It's so very important. And that's, I mean, honestly, for any time you're trying to sight fish a fish that's not on a bed, you know, if it's not in a defensive mode where it's literally sitting in this place and you can drop something straight down to it. If you're trying to feed that fish, you need to drop your bait upstream of it, let the bait get down to the level of the fish, and then naturally try to work it to that fish. That's going to get a lot more of them to bite than anything. So definitely keep that in mind when you're creek fishing, throwing that wacky worm. And that was a big key for me with it. And I only caught one fish on the wacky worm the first day of the tournament. I didn't use it any of the second day, any of the third day. It was all on that championship day was when it really worked really hard for me. So, and caught a lot of nice ones on it, man. That back of that particular creek was especially loaded. So it was definitely a fun trip up to Maryland this go around. Very thankful again for it, and thankful for the blessing that God had in mind for us up there. But yeah, such a fun week and such a fun way to fish. Something that you can get out there on almost any body of water that's got just a little bit of a creek coming into it. I've done this in Ohio on fisheries that we caught smallmouth on. I've done it, around here in East Tennessee. Done it down south some in some places that have got creeks flowing in, like Lake Lanier, Georgia. I've done it there. Alabama River, been there and done it on that system. But yeah, this is a fun way to fish in the summertime. Beat the heat a little bit. Go up a creek, go catch you some bass.